Czechcast, a podcast in English about Czech and Moravian society, history, culture and economy.
Hello and welcome to Czechcast, a podcast in English about all things Czech. This time, my guest is someone who knows how to represent Czech culture in one of the most diverse and dynamic places in the world, New York City. Tereza Porybná is a cultural manager, anthropologist and curator. She's currently the director of the Czech Center in New York, and she spent several years in the same position in London, but her international experience goes far beyond just London and Manhattan. Over the years, she studied and worked on projects in various countries in Europe, but also, for example, in Africa, where she led educational and humanitarian programs in Addis Ababa with the Czech NGO Člověk v tísni, or People in Need. Her background is in visual anthropology, but as she explains, her creative energy found its true form not in making art, but in creating the right conditions for it to happen.
I somehow found that the natural talent I have is to create space for these people and to bring them together and to be creative, but in my own way, not necessarily through a specific art form.
Among other things, in this episode we talk also about what it means to build safe, democratic spaces for cultural exchange at a time when those values face increasing pressure, even in long-standing democracies. And sometimes these cultural connections can take a life of their own, even in a Harlem bar.
I was sitting at a bar in Harlem a couple of weeks ago, and someone started talking to me, and I said what I do, and it was a young guy, and he said, "Oh, I love Dvořák," and this sort of hip hop looking type showed me his Spotify that was full of these Dvořák compositions that he listens to when he goes to work.
Her vision for the Czech Center in New York is bold, interdisciplinary, and engaged with the pressing issues of our time, from climate to mental health to human rights.
I think what we can offer is continuity in our programming, in the fact that we are a safe, democratic space that is open to dialogue, that is open to cultural exchange, and we open it up to topics that maybe the US institutions might not be able to do due to all these funding cuts that are happening. I will be satisfied with my mission here.
So stay with us for a conversation about creativity, community and cultural diplomacy in New York and other places in the United States. I'm Vít Pohanka and this is Czechcast.
Czechcast, a podcast in English about all things Czech. Whether you're an English-speaking expat living in Czechia and Slovakia, or a descendant of the Czechs, Moravians and Slovaks who left for a better life in America, Australia, Britain or Canada so long ago that you don't speak the language of the old country, this podcast in English is for you.
If I were to introduce myself in a few sentences, I'd say I'm currently the director of Czech Center in New York. I'm a visual anthropologist. I'm a cultural worker. I'm a curator occasionally, and I'm a traveler.
Tereza, I think that when someone looks at your CV, he or she cannot miss the fact that you've lived and worked in so many different places, from Prague to London, Addis Ababa, Paris, now New York. Tell me, what brought you to all these places? Was it just work, study, or something else? I don't know, perhaps fate?
I think possibly a combination of both. For some reason, I always feel more alive when I have two homes. It's something maybe I carry from the way I grew up as a child. And I always enjoyed learning languages, learning cultures, and I always knew that's also how I want to live my life. But I never traveled that much as a tourist, or just I never took a gap year, for example. In all these places you mentioned, I came for work. But the way these work opportunities came to me were quite natural and intuitive. It was never I never had a strategic plan, and I think that probably shows from the CV. Like I went from Addis Ababa to London based on some more feeling and happy coincidences rather than super careful planning of the next career move.
If I may ask, particularly about Paris, I actually ended up in Paris in the 1990s working for UNESCO. I just applied for a job. I was given a job, to cut the long story short, and I was in Paris. And I had these kind of high expectations, high hopes for Paris, this city of high culture and friendly French people, as I thought. Now, don't get me wrong, I still think Paris is, of course, beautiful, and I still like Paris, and I dare say I even love the city. But, in a way, back in the 1990s, I was a little bit disappointed by the arrogance, for lack of a better word, and sometimes something that I felt as a downright hostility of the city and some of its people. What is your memory of Paris?
In Paris, I was a student. I was a young student trying to survive the French education system for my exchange program. So in a way, I share your feelings. I think at that point, I was really quite young, like 19 or 20. And Paris for me was connected to books I read as a teenager about the art scene there in the 20s and 30s, and of course to cinema and all these things I loved, and possibly also a little bit cliches. And then the reality of the city was quite lonely for me when I was living there, and I had to work a lot, so I wasn't really living this bohemian Parisian dream I had in mind. I was spending a lot of time just in the library, reading and writing and doing homework for my studies. But I still love the city. It's one of the places I always love going back.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? And as I say, even though I felt quite lonely there sometimes, especially at the beginning, Paris still has this kind of special place in my heart. By the way, where did you stay in Paris, if I may ask?
I lived with family friends on Avenue Rapp, so very, very close to Champ de Mars, very close to Pont d'Alma, very close to Palais de Tokyo, which and even to this day is one of my favorite museums where I always go when I'm in town. And I agree on the loneliness, and I think I sort of through the years I came to terms with the fact that this will always be a city where I'm an outsider, that Paris hasn't adopted me like I felt London has, and I'm okay with it. I'm happy just to visit.
To be an outsider in Paris, right?
I accept it, and I don't have a problem anymore.
Now, Tereza, you definitely speak from the depth of my heart. I've spent some time in London, like you too. I've spent some time in Washington, D.C. and New York. And in New York, it seems to me that it's more normal kind of to be an outsider. I mean, every second person seems to be an outsider in New York, in the sense that it's not a place where you kind of are part of the locals, of the group, unless you were really born there, like, for example, the actor Al Pacino, who really grew up in Bronx, or unless you are extremely rich and have an apartment or something like that in Manhattan. Whereas Paris, in my opinion, compared to London or New York, seems to be a place where people of all classes still have this kind of identity that they are Parisians, they speak the right accent, and they really sometimes let you know that you don't speak the right accent. I don't know. Is this something that rings a bell to you as well?
Absolutely. I agree. There is like a maybe stronger definition of what a Parisian person is, but I also, and like I apologize to all Parisians who are listening for the generalization, but I think it's connected to language as well. I think I was struggling a lot because at that point I was, among other things, studying for this very difficult French exam, the DALF and all these things, which you have to know so much about the French grammar, and I was studying so hard and learning all these crazy presque parfait de subjonctif and things like that. And but then still I would have the accent. Still, the cab driver would respond in English, and I think there is this subtle while as in New York, nobody cares how you talk. Nobody cares about your accent. It's such a melting pot that
Whereas in Paris they care, don't they?
they do. Yeah, they absolutely care.
If I can ask you, what first kind of pulled you towards culture and art in such an international way? Was there perhaps a moment that really set you on this path, or was it a kind of long-term process that brought you where you are?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. As I sort of get more older and middle aged, I sometimes think about my childhood more than I used to, and where this passion started. I think it's through fairy tales, maybe, and storytelling and mythology. I used to love that even as a very, very young kid. I was fascinated by stories and then how the stories were written or depicted. I kept looking at paintings, and I was fortunate enough to grow up in a family that really loved culture. My mother is a huge film enthusiast, and she had a lot of books on French cinema and Hollywood cinema. So I would sort of grow up surrounded by this and by the monographies of, very classical things like French Impressionism or Picasso or Georgia O'Keeffe. But these were things I was used to seeing in our home library, and I was drawn to them. And then I remember once my father took me to a painter studio in Prague, and I was maybe 8 or 9, and I felt at home. I immediately felt that there is something special. There is some vibe going on that I don't see elsewhere. And I think where that started, and I never questioned it. I always knew I want to work in culture and arts.
How about yourself, painting and devoting yourself to art? I hope this is not too kind of personal question. Did you ever think about that? I mean, painting or, doing art yourself. Have you ever tried?
Of course, of course, of course. Well, many art workers are failed artists, or people who sort of wanted to be artists but were not. I'm joking now, but yeah, of course, I still paint. I love photography. That was something I was considering doing, to be a photographer. But in my life, I was always surrounded by very talented people. I was lucky in that sense that I really had like a lot of talented friends when I was growing up, and I saw how not easy, but how naturally for some of them artistic ideas come, or ideas for text or writing come, and for me it was always a struggle. And I don't mean it that I would mind hard work or struggle, but I somehow found that the natural talent I have is to create space for these people and to bring them together and to be creative, but in my own way, not necessarily through a specific art form.
And that's what you are now doing in New York, and you spent quite a few years doing that in London. Let me ask you like this. If you were to explain what makes Czech culture and art and Czech cultural heritage special, and I will probably use quite a bad word, sellable, in places like London and New York, what would you say? What makes Czech culture interesting and sellable?
Yes, again, excellent question. I'm actually still trying to figure that out. When I was preparing for this interview, I was going through some other interviews on Czech cultural diplomacy and some texts, and I think the job I have now is to work with the sellable, so-called sellable culture, which, of course, for us is classical music. And everyone will give you this answer. We have such, but especially here, we have such a huge reputation, and people really, really love the Czech music. And I was sitting in a bar at a bar in Harlem a couple of weeks ago, and someone started talking to me, and I said what I do, and it was a young guy, and he said, "Oh, I love Dvořák." And this sort of hip hop looking type showed me his Spotify that was full of these Dvořák compositions that he listens to when he goes to work. And so it's very, very present. And I think my job is to combine this sellable with all the unsellable and introduce the more maybe unobvious choices. Apart from classical music, we also have very extraordinary contemporary music composers. For example, one of them is living here in New York, Petr Kotík, who is an amazing, an amazing musical talent who worked with the likes of Phil Glass or Nicolas Cage. And he gathers around himself young Czech contemporary composers who do have an audience here. Whenever we do a contemporary music concert, it's always sold out because New York is also a place for niche art and alternative art and very specific art. Because the group that is interested in this is always big enough. And that's a huge advantage for what I'm able to do. We, of course, have a huge reputation in cinema. We were just talking about that yesterday. Like the legacy of the Czech New Wave is huge here. People are really extremely knowledgeable on our cinema from the 60s and 70s, and they are still interested in it. We screened, for example, the newly restored version of Kalamita by Vera Chytilová at MoMA last month or a couple of months ago, and it was completely packed by an American audience. So there is a lot to play with from the young culture and the young scene. I think we do have artists that are internationally, you would say, sellable or that touch the contemporary themes. Eva Koťátková, for example, is very successful abroad and is doing a big private commission here this summer. Klára Hosnedlová, for example, is a young Czech artist who was selected as the first artist to do a big sculptural commission for the new building of the new museum, which is, again, a huge honor for a young person coming from a small country like we are.
Again, you led the Czech Center in London. Now you are in New York, both great, predominantly English-speaking cities. Is there a difference in how you had to work in London and how you work in New York?
It's completely different.
In what way?
Different. I'm still figuring out how to do it best here. In London, I sort of knew because it's still Europe. Like it is over it's an island and it is an Anglophone country and it has its specific, but it's still very connected to Europe. It was an environment and a communication style I completely understood. So I had no time. I didn't need any time to dive in. I was sort of immediately there, if you know what I mean. And here it's so different. It's a specific landscape. New York is a special beast for the art world. It's a different style of working. It's much faster than in London and also much slower because people are really careful what they are doing. Even if these are independent art spaces, everybody has to really fight for their place here. So I think in that sense, London offered a bit more comfort. The other difference in my job here is that I have the privilege to work in this big building, the Bohemian National Hall, when I was in London, we just had an office in the beginning. So I was much freer to explore partnerships and work outside of my own home. Here, one of my main jobs is to bring people to us. That's the big difference.
I was in the United States from 2008 when actually the Bohemian Hall opened, as it is now, until 2013 as a correspondent. And I have to say that I had the experience that whenever I came to the Czech Center in New York, in the Bohemian Hall, it wasn't exactly crowded. Let me put it like that. Is that something that has changed? Is there something that you have to work on? Maybe it's completely different now.
I think definitely since 2013, the building has acquired a reputation. So I have a dog here, and I walk him in the Upper East Side parks, and people talk to you. And so even with these random like dog walkers, I mentioned I work at the Bohemian National Hall, and they will know that it exists. They will know there's some Czech flag, and they will know there's a Czech restaurant. That's usually all they know, but they know the building. So it's not an unknown venue. And I think all the previous directors before me have done a really good job at building an audience for our programming. I'm really lucky that our events are always full since November when I started. I think part of the reason is that I don't do so many events. We usually program twice a week. And with this tempo, we're able to take care of the marketing, of the PR. And we also work a lot in collaboration with local artists or international artists even. And that helps us to, keep the audience alive and changing and vibrant, which is what I love about the work, actually, is that you're excited about something, and then you have an opportunity to tell other people about it, and they come and see it. We screened a film yesterday called Mort. I don't know if you've seen it.
No, I haven't.
It's a Czech film by a young filmmaker that premiered at the Karlovy Vary Festival, the last edition, and it's a film about the pig slaughter. A very Czech vernacular topic, but we had a complete full house. We had to add chairs, and we had a really diverse audience. Of course, Czechs, but Americans. We had some Hispanic people coming, and everybody was engaged in the film because it reflected a very local tradition. But I think the wonderful thing about the New York audience is that people come from so many parts of the world that they can actually engage in even such a deeply local thing like the Czech pig slaughter. So it was a wonderful evening with a half-hour Q&A, and we were very happy with that.
Tereza, preparing for this interview, I read a few other interviews with you, and you seem to often talk about connecting generations and various disciplines in your project. Again, for a listener, why is that such an important part of what you do? And how are you trying to bring that into your work in New York?
I will answer maybe more personally than I normally do. I never felt, I always felt better being part of multiple groups instead of just one. And I think that's somehow where this whole passion for interdisciplinarity and intergenerational projects stems from. But apart from the personal level, I believe that one of the beautiful roles of art and culture is the way it can communicate themes and open people to hear maybe something that's not their opinion, allowing us to step out of our shells and allowing us to sort of reconsider what we think. And I think that is important, not just for individual humans, but for communities and societies. So that's the sort of abstract thinking behind that. In terms of how it works in practice, on a very basic level, I work with young artists that I try to support their work or show it in our gallery or organize residencies for them or art talks. But at the same time, I would work with artists also in their 70s or 80s. And possibly bring them together as well, because sometimes things get better through time, and the trend is always to support the young and new. But I think our job, especially as a public cultural institution, is to create space for both. We opened up our program to also very young kids. We started doing art classes for children from 3 to 9. And these art classes are always somehow connected with the exhibition or artists that come to the Czech Center to show their work or prepare. So we have this educational aspect now as well.
Yeah, I think you did. And I just wonder, from my experience in New York, it's such a diverse city and a city of fierce competition in all respects. How do you want to go forward from this? Because there are so many places showing so much culture, programs for young children. There are so many places where you can do that in New York. And I'm just wondering, what can one do in your position to make a place like the Czech Center in one way or another kind of unique and a special place for people to come to?
It's I wonder that too every day when I come to the office. We are already special. Like we already are special through this building, through the history that the building has, through the fact that it is a Czech cultural center, and through the fact that a country that not necessarily all Americans or even New Yorkers know where it is. It's true. Not everyone knows where Czech Republic is exactly located. We have this amazing building on the Upper East Side, and I think this contrast makes it already special somehow. The ways how you compete, another thing on a very pragmatic level, our events are either free or very inexpensive. And people appreciate that. New York culture is abundant, obviously, but it's also very costly. You can spend your whole salary on just seeing 4 Broadway performances, while as here at the Czech Center, you can see excellent, very professionally organized events by extremely talented artists, and it's either free of charge or for a very low price, and that in the city this counts and people appreciate it. And then in terms of what we can offer content-wise, you just have to be aware. Like I constantly follow what's happening in the city on all levels, like big exhibitions, but also small art spaces. And you try to, you have to stay engaged. You have to stay engaged with the vibe of the city, whether it's through the topics, or whether it's through approaching New York-based artists to do things here. I think that's, for me, that's the strategy I decided to try out, and hopefully in 4 years we will see it works out.
Maybe I'm kind of jumping a little bit here, but you mentioned Dvořák, and obviously when you say Dvořák in New York, most people, I would say people with a general level of education, will know who Antonín Dvořák was and that he spent some time in New York. But in one of the interviews that I read with you, you mentioned a kind of a dream project, something completely different, an exhibition of Libuše Jarcoviáková and her photography in New York. Why do you think it's important to bring something like that in New York, in the context that, as I try to explain, why not build on, Dvořák and some famous name that are already there? Why try to bring something new?
Because sometimes the building is done and you want to build a new one, or you want to build like a beautiful light appendix to what is built. And Libuše's work is incredible. She's someone I admire greatly for her vision, for persisting, for persisting as an artist and as a human in often difficult conditions, and in conditions where she was not appreciated immediately. It took her a long time to get recognition, and it shows in the work, which is very authentic, very unapologetic, and I think these qualities resonate with New York. I think her resilience is a very New York quality. So that's where I see the connection, and we are very happy that we managed to create a residency opportunity for Libuše at the Residency Unlimited program, which is a Brooklyn-based artist in residency project that's been running for decades. I think Libuše might be definitely one of their oldest residents. So there's the intergenerational aspect again. And we will be doing talks with her and screen her film. And hopefully this residency will be the first building block to get her work presented in a major New York institution.
Let me ask you a question that just kind of came to my mind right now, because Libuše Jarcoviáková was definitely, I think, struggling, if I'm not wrong, to be recognized even in the Czech Republic back home. Do you think that there's perhaps an element of sexism in that? If that's too hard a question, we don't have to go there. But I'm just wondering, was she struggling a little bit because she's a woman?
I actually think it's a great question, and I'm very happy that we touched upon it. I think in her case, it was just a really timing. She was, a lot of her years were productive years were during the communist regime. Her work was too weird, too extreme, too erotic, too queer, possibly. So she was a bit ahead of her time. Maybe, possibly it might, like art, the art world is still a difficult space for women, I'd say. And I'm really happy you're asking this question, because part of the line in my programming is revisiting these women in Czech art history that sort of remained undiscovered, although they're brilliant. Of course, I love working with the younger artists I mentioned, like Eva Koťátková or Klára Hosnedlová, many others. But I think part of our role is to revisit these huge female talents in our history. For me, Libuše is one of them. But then, for example, Běla Kolářová, who is an absolutely amazing artist, and a lot of her works are at MoMA. I think she is another artist that hasn't been fully recognized in the Czech Republic. And at the Czech Center in New York, we can perhaps help, to give her, although posthumous, but still the recognition she deserves. There are so many others, like the Válova siblings, Magdalena Titlová, many others. I don't think it's all about sexism, but definitely it's true that the female position in art has been a more difficult one.
You are listening to Czechcast, a podcast in English about all things Czech. I'm Vít Pohanka, and today my guest is Tereza Porybná, director of the Czech Center in New York. You spent some time in Ethiopia, in Africa. If I may ask, what did you do there? What did it give you? What kind of experience was it?
In Ethiopia, I was working for People in Need, Člověk v tísni.
For a Czech non-governmental organization, yeah.
And the mission in Ethiopia was the second largest mission at that point that People in Need was doing. It covered several regions of the country, which is the second largest in terms of population, second largest country in Africa. My job specifically was connected to education, children welfare, and urban poverty.
So, what exactly did that mean in terms of your daily workload there? What did you actually do?
Well, the educational work, apart from the fact that we were, as most people know what the work is, we were building schools, but I was also talking to politicians and creating sort of programs and manuals to support inclusive education, to support changes in the educational system to a more engaging one for the children, to support female education, etc. my sort of personal project that took the most of my time was the children welfare program, where we were trying to help prevention of child trafficking, which at that point when I was working in Ethiopia was a huge issue of children being trafficked to work in either in other African countries or taken to Yemen and then Lebanon and then Saudi Arabia as very cheap domestic labor. So we were working with police, we were building shelters, we were creating spaces that would provide alternative job opportunities for the teenagers who have gone through this experience. And the third project, the urban poverty, was a more positive one. We were doing like small sort of micro investment programs for women living in very poor neighborhoods and helping them build their own co-ops and their own sort of like micro businesses, which is based on a theory of an Indian Nobel Prize winner economist who was talking about the fact that you usually don't help poverty by pouring money from top, but you help poverty through micro growth on the very small levels.
Besides what you do at the Czech Center in New York and what you did in London, you've also done, as I read, some fascinating work, in my opinion at least, in places like Ethiopia. You've taught at Charles University, and let me ask you like this. You are now the head of the Czech Center in New York, and you did some other work outside of the institutional kind of framework of Czech centers. Does it help you? And if yes, how?
It helps me. It helps me because, for example, through teaching, I taught at Charles University, but also lately these past 3 years, I was teaching at UMPRUM, the Academy of Art, Architecture and Design in Prague. And these teaching experiences help you to communicate your thoughts. They help you to engage. They help you to receive like often very critical feedback from the youngest generation, which is, you know, sometimes the harshest feedback you can get as you are growing in your career. Ethiopia, I'm still extremely grateful for the fact that I was able to work and live there. It provides you context and also knowledge. So the way it helps me in New York is that I'm quite quick at understanding certain issues, certain differences, certain problems. I have gained an insight in how to do crisis management, for example, through my work in Ethiopia, which in arts can also be helpful. So, you know, you mix your experiences and match them to whatever reality is throwing at you, and I have to say that at this point of my life in New York, I sort of feel I have something to offer to this building and to this job. And I think that is the diversity of my experience and the fact that I can sort of quickly pick up on things and move with a bit more fluidity than if I had only lived in the Czech Republic.
How do you see future of institutions such as Czech centers, not just in the United States, but all over the world, in the time when especially young people get a lot, if not most, of news on social networks? And it seems sometimes, without much exaggerating, that if you are not very present there, I mean on social networks, it's as if you nearly didn't exist.
Yeah, it's everything is changing. We are absolutely dependent on social media for advertising our events. It's a big part of our work, actually, to have an online presence. So that's just non-negotiable. There's no way to work around that. In terms of how things are changing, like I think it's affecting literature. For example, a lot of my friends who are writers or poets also teach, and they they often tell me stories about their students not really physically not being able to read long texts. So I guess there will be a huge change generationally. How we try to tackle that is just through trying. We try to keep the programs entertaining, I think, and also people still like to be together. Of course, that the concept that we are all on our phones and just want to spend time online. It's true, but people also like to be together. People like to come to concerts. They in New York, I rediscovered the power of live music, and if you provide that, and if you choose the right artist, people do get out of their apartments and actually, want to be part of something that's live with other humans next to them. I don't think we're there yet where we wouldn't, where we would only be online. Hopefully we won't ever be.
This might be a tough question for someone in your position, but let me ask you, do you think that the traditional ways how we appreciate art through books, museums, and galleries are still relevant and will stay relevant?
I think so. And if you look at Instagram influencers, a lot of very high profile Instagram influencers make their career out of being in museums. For example, there's this famous British queer Instagram influencer, Coco, who cross dresses and then visits museums and does inappropriate comments about very famous classical paintings, and this person has millions of followers. So there's ways to work with tradition. There's ways to work with books. There's ways to work with museum that they are still relevant. I firmly believe that. I have no doubt.
If you look in the future, what is your vision for the Czech Center in New York? And now you can give me kind of both realistic vision, minimalistic, and dreamlike vision, which would be possible in an ideal world. What would you say?
So realistically, for me, especially at this time of quite turbulent, let's say, global political situation, I think that's safe to label it that way. I think what we can offer is continuity in our programming, in the fact that we are a safe, democratic space that is open to dialogue, that is open to cultural exchange. I think if we manage to keep this, level of programming, level of quality, and level of interaction with the New York scene for 4 years, and we open it up to topics that maybe the U.S. institutions might not be able to do due to all these funding cuts that are happening, I will be satisfied with my mission here. I will be satisfied with my mission here if there are more people who want to do their events here. I think that's one of my ambitions, is that when you have the New York Design Festival or Architecture Festival, that they think of our building as a venue to showcase work, to be engaged with, to talk to us, not just to a venue provider, but to a partner who can develop interesting content with them and bring perhaps like a Central European or European perspective. I very much see the Czech Center not just as a Czech center, but as a European center. I think that's our job, all of us as culture institutes, is not just to promote our own nationalities, but to promote this beautiful thing that Europe is. And I still think Europe is a good idea. I think it's nice that we are one continent that's so culturally diverse, but still so close. On the dream level, I would love to have a maybe artist space in Brooklyn or Lower East Side that could have its own programming, that could really be more experimental, that could be maybe a place where people can live for a few months and then do their show. That would be amazing, and I think that would be useful for for Czech artists, definitely, but also for the New York scene. There's never enough of free spaces to create. And I would like us to maybe step out of New York a little bit and work in other states. Hopefully, we'll manage a few projects by the time my mission ends here.
So are you already working in this direction? I mean, bringing Czech culture and art to other places in the US?
Yes, well, we're working quite closely with Washington D.C. also because the embassy resides there, and hopefully in September we will collaborate on an exhibition of Jan Svoboda, the photographer, at the Katzen Art Center in Washington D.C. In collaboration with the curator Pavel Vančát and of course the embassy. The Czech embassy in Washington. So that's definitely one thing that's happening. We have a lot of collaborations in Boston, mainly through literature, also because there's the Slavic department at Harvard University, and its head Jonathan Bolton, who's a big promoter of Czech literature, both current and old. In LA, not so much because it's so far away. America is so big. It's just really, just for me. I'm based on the Upper East Side, Manhattan, and for me to go to Brooklyn is really a day trip. So it makes it a bit hard to get out of the city. I would love to do something in Seattle, maybe some music projects because they have a good scene. And Chicago, yes, we have musicians. Sometimes if they play here, they go up there. I'm just thinking of what would my dream be. And I did my field work in Alaska actually when I was doing my postgrad here. So maybe I could go back with some Czech project to this very remote state. Who knows?
What was that about in Alaska?
I was writing a chapter for my thesis that was dealing with cultural memory and how indigenous nations can use Western media, such as film, for example, or video or radio, to revive their cultural memory and traditions. And I was based in this very small village in Western Alaska called Bethel, which I chose because they had the oldest radio and TV station run by Alaska Native communities. And I was working with them for a couple of months.
Now, that must have been really amazing.
It was so amazing. It was so amazing. I loved it there. It was a difficult place, not actually beautiful, because most people know Alaska from these, postcards of the icebergs or whales or bears or, this pristine nature. But Bethel, where I lived, was not that spectacular, but it was like a very unique place and incredibly interesting history, of this Alaskan state. It was actually not many people know that, but it is one of the last places of European contact, Alaska. So they stayed isolated for very, very long before they were sort of, in quotes, discovered.
By the Americans, I suppose, not by the Russians before.
Yeah, by the Americans, then by the Russians. There was also a big influence of the Moravian Church, which is directly connected to Jan Amos Komenský. So the Moravian Church, they were the biggest missionary in Alaska. And that was for me so funny that I was one of the, I think maybe the first Czech person most of the people ever met when I was in Bethel. And then they took me to church, and the church was Moravian.
Yeah, let me make a little digression here, because back in 2010 I visited and recorded a report in the city of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where there is a very strong tradition of Moravian Church. They have even Moravian University there with a big statue of Jan Amos Komenský or Comenius. There's a Moravian museum because that whole area was settled by Moravians who came from Europe via Germany, even though they didn't speak Czech but German. I also, let me just mention, visited a Moravian church in Washington, D.C., but that was a different community. They came from the Caribbean, and from what I could see, it's almost exclusively African American because that community are descendants of African slaves who were converted by Moravian missionaries in the Caribbean and later left for the United States and settled in the DC area. And I even took my wife and kids for a Sunday service in the Moravian church. And I think we were the only white people from Moravia in this African-American Moravian community, which I have to say was for us very interesting experience. And I would even say moving experience. But back to you, Tereza. You seem to be really happy in New York, like a fish in the water, as we say in Czech. Can you imagine yourself perhaps even staying in New York and settling there?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I feel good here. I never, sometimes like I think the fluidity of my life is nice, but now when I'm in New York, I feel very happy here. I think part of the reason is the informality that New Yorkers have. I can't really explain it, but it's easier for me to work in an environment where everybody calls you Tereza. You know, it's very immediate, the communication. It can be harsh, like New Yorkers can be, upfront. But I function in it, and it sort of makes me relaxed. I was told by some friends of mine, but that maybe, New York is for people in their 20s or 30s, which I'm sadly no longer that category, but I really feel good here. So I can imagine staying forever because the city is so rich in things to discover. But of course, there's not that much work opportunities in my field, and everybody's brilliant and everybody's ambitious. So it's a tough city to find your place in, I guess, if you really want to live here. But I'm so lucky, I get to have 4 years here doing what I like. So that's enough. I don't really think beyond that.
Well, that's it for this episode of Czechcast. Many thanks to Tereza Porybná for the thoughtful conversation and for the work she's doing to keep Czech culture alive and relevant far beyond our borders. If you enjoyed this or other episodes, please don't forget to subscribe, share or leave us a review. You'll find more episodes and stories, past and future, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Vít Pohanka, thanks for listening, and until next time, stay curious and take care. Naslyšenou.
Czechcast, a podcast in English about all things Czech. Whether you're an English-speaking expat living in Czechia and Slovakia, or a descendant of the Czechs, Moravians and Slovaks who left for a better life in America, Australia, Britain or Canada so long ago that you don't speak the language of the old country, this podcast in English is for you.